What is up guys, Wraec is here with a new video, and today we are going to have a look at the skill preview for our new Transcendence Hero, Terminator of all, Lord of Death, Azrael. He's basically going to be released on Friday. He's going to be our new Transcendence Assassin, and I think there's going to be a huge event on Friday as well. There might be an Awakening event related to him, so keep that in mind. The recent Transcendence Heroes that were released all had an Awakening event where you could get rewards for summoning Azrael copies. So if you still have Azrael copies in your bag, maybe wait till Friday to actually summon and awaken them. Might be some juicy rewards in there for you. For now, let's basically have a look at his animation first. That was released as well. That is basically his animation. With the flute, getting his wings here. Looking pretty cool, I have to say. In general, I quite like the animations DH puts on the heroes nowadays. Always quite detailed, quite nice. Pretty good work on that. The next thing we are going to look at are his skills. Keep in mind, as this is a skill preview again, we won't see any numbers, meaning like it will say deals damage to self and not deals 1500% of attack damage to self, as it would if it was a usual skill in game. They always cut those numbers out so they can nerf the hero in the meantime if they find something in their last testing, or fix a bug and like have to change the numbers again. To not spark outrage in the community, as was the case with like EOS back then when she was released, the base version. She was changed shortly before the release, and players didn't really like that. So now we get those previews without numbers. Now, one thing I want to note before we actually dive into the skills. This hero is like a direct upgrade to the base Azrael. The base Azrael had a number of skills that were interesting, but in some way always flawed. Like either they were just pretty bad or lacked the little mechanic that would have made them good, and this hero fixes a lot of those problems, which is a weird way to release a Transcendence Hero. I don't really like that. It just feels like they designed the Transcendence Hero and then they thought like, yeah, we kind of need the base version of him, like Azrael base version, how can we do that? And then they cut off certain things from the skills and just made them worse, and then released this Transcendence version now as the actual hero that was meant to be. So not really a fan of that. The normal Azrael was quite bad. Really not good. We tested him quite a lot. Some of his mechanics didn't work in the way they were described. They tried to fix the skill description later and it was quite weird because they didn't. Like the skill description was still wrong, even after the first fix to it. And now Azrael, I forgot about him, to be honest. I forgot about him. Like I thought about the event and I wasn't even sure I had the base hero. I had to look in my back and then I thought like, yeah, you tested him. You kept him, of course, and he was bad. So a lot of those things are actually fixed with our new Transcendence Azrael. So might actually be a good hero. Let's dive into the skills, guys. Advent of Doom active skill. Deals damage to self with every layer of Curse of Doomsday, dealing extra damage to self. Meanwhile inflicts soul castigation on enemies with the lowest HP. So that's the first part of the active skill. We already see we have self damage again, which was something that didn't fare well in my testing, because it came with a fair bit of problems. Like if you wanted to max the self-damage, for example, the problem was like you couldn't really use a crown, because crown reduces the damage can be dealt to you, so also the damage you can deal to yourself, which meant he was always like played as kind of a squishy hero. And for the most part, an E5 version of him did a draw in the 1 versus 1 against the homeowner version with buffs and everything in our testing, which was super weird. But that might change actually, because I feel like the self damage and the soul castigation damage won't really be the main focus of this hero. I think the main focus is going to be the Curse of Doomsday, and we will have a look at that now. To explain this base damage, self damage, soul castigation, basically the idea of the damage already in the base version and now in the Transcendence version was You'll deal damage to yourself with your active skill, and then there is a Soul Castigation skill effect, and the Soul Castigation skill effect is applied to 1 or 2 or whatever enemies. In the base version it was 1 enemy, and then the damage you dealt to yourself is also applied to the enemy. And the problem with that was the first thing that I said, like if you had a crown equipped, that reduced the damage. And the skill effect could actually be reduced by the enemy's stats as well. That meant like if the enemy had a crown equipped, Soul Castigation would deal less damage to the enemy. So if both heroes have a crown equipped, then your own crown reduced that damage and then the enemy crown again. So it was like double dipping into defenses, which was quite bad. The other thing, and a lot of people understood that wrong, was his last sentence. This effect does not land a crit and its damage is fixed, which cannot be reduced or increased by attributes or skill effects. And some people thought that indeed the active skill that he had could not deal a crit or could not be buffed by any attributes, which of course was wrong. The damage he deals to himself, that part can be buffed with skills and attributes that your own Azrael has. Just the skill effect transferring that damage that you did to yourself to the enemy, that part cannot crit and cannot be buffed. So it's just not double dipping into your offensive buffs. That is the main part. And it was quite bad in testing because you often just killed yourself without doing a whole lot to the enemy, and that just sucked. So talking about Curse of Doomsday now. Curse of Doomsday is basically a new part to this active skill. It enhances a lot of Azrael's skills and increases the damage dealt to enemies after he dies. And when he dies, he consumes all layers of Curse of Doomsday to deal damage to all enemies, with every one more layer of Curse of Doomsday dealing extra damage up to 3 times. With the wording, it's kind of unclear if it's going to be 3 or 4 hits. We have to look into that. Will require some testing. But I feel like this Curse of Doomsday will actually be a major part of his damage and will play a major role in whether he's good or not. If that is huge damage and you can stack some of those layers of Curse of Doomsday on him, he will become like a time bomb. And this would be quite cool. This will be quite cool if that is indeed the case. And will make him a fair bit stronger. So, going back to his active skill now, we could see that he basically deals more damage to himself with every layer of Doomsday he has, meaning that like the higher you stack the layers of Doomsday, the more likely he is to instantly kill himself, which might not be bad. Let's wait for the rest of the skills. It might not be bad that he can actually kill himself faster like this. Let's talk about the second part now. Afterward, deals damage to enemies with the lowest HP and extra damage equal to a certain percent of target's lost HP, with a chance to grant self layer of Curse of Doomsday. So pretty nice, the active skill can grant us a layer of Curse of Doomsday. We are not reliant on the other skills for that. And one nice part here, we can actually deal damage to the enemies directly, and not only over with the Soul Castigation skill effect. We will target the lowest HP enemies, dealing some damage and also some damage equal to the certain percent of the target's lost HP, which will likely have a cap based on the on his own attack, like 1500% of attack damage as a cap for this percent of target's lost HP, which is usual with percent-based skills, as they would otherwise be quite devastating in PvE. Just imagine having a Star Expedition boss is like 50% of his HP, and Azrael attacks him, and this skill, for example, would deal 50% of the target's lost HP as damage. In that case, you would just take off a quarter of the life of a Star Expedition boss at whatever life he is. Doesn't matter, he could have infinite life and he would still take off a quarter of the HP of the Star Expedition boss, and that would be absolutely insane. So this is always capped at like some part of his attack. We don't know it yet, and in recent times it has often been the case that there is a sublimation to actually buff those caps. For SFX, for example, for the second passive skill, they buffed the percent of attack damage cap that was on the extra damage for her dodge from 1500% of attack damage to 5000% of attack damage, and this would actually be quite huge. So maybe we will see something like this in his sublimations as well. Then again, the Age never, in the last times, they didn't show the sublimations before, so we will have to see in-game on Friday, how they will actually be performed and how the sublimations actually look, and I will do an additional review on that, and we can talk about the sublimations as well. So now let's have a look at the Annihilating Reaper passive skill. The Annihilating Reaper passive skill is passive 1, so changes the basic attack. And the basic attack is changed to deals damage to enemies with the lowest HP with every layer of Curse of Doomsday, dealing extra damage. So we have a pretty standard basic skill that deals a certain amount of damage and is indeed buffed by our Curse of Doomsday, but does not use them up. So it doesn't say like then remove the layers of Curse of Doomsday or something, and there is no mechanic for that. So the basic skill should just deal more damage. The more layers of Curse of Doomsday we have, and we deal damage to the enemy, which is good as well, and not to ourselves. I like that, but there isn't really much to say about this basic, as it's just quite standard, and the only really interesting part will be to see if the extra damage from the layers of Curse of Doomsday are separate damage instances, meaning it's like a layered hit. Layered hit are in usual better than just big hits. If you can deal 4 times 1 million damage, that is in our current PvP meta better than dealing 4 million damage. The reason for that being that you mainly want to take off layers of Unbending Will, and having 4 hits for that would take off 4 layers of Unbending Will, which is a lot better than just taking off 1 layer with 1 big hit. So that will be something that we have to test. Doesn't say it here. But could be quite good, has some potential for that. A decent basic skill, basically. Then we have the Breath of Death passive skill, passive 2. Whenever a hero dies except self, self gains layer of Curse of Doomsday and removes a random debuff from self, and that stood out for me because like a hero dies, and later on they say if an enemy dies, and here if an ally dies, so they kind of have a difference here. Hero does seem to refer to any viable hero on the battlefield. Self gains 1 layer of Curse of Doomsday, which is nice, and removes 1 random debuff from self. We have to see if they include CC in debuff. I think for the Ferrokeen Vessel it also says debuff for the core, and it actually also means CC. So that would be quite cool if any hero dies, that it would basically break the CC for him. Of course, this already shows a big synergy with heroes like Carry that can revive on their own, and currently in the meta we only have one team that includes carries, and this is the Star Alchemist Home's core team, which is basically the most broken PvP team in the meta, and this includes 2 carries, and I reckon we are going to see a version of it with like Star Alchemist Home's Mystic Fairy Freya, Ferrokeen Vessa, 2 carries, and like so now I forgot the name. Lord of Death Azrael. We will see a version of that, and I think this can be quite devastating, having 2 carries on the team that constantly provide buffs for Azrael. Basically, we remove debuffs, we gain layers of Curse of Doomsday, which might be, if we run a carry team, our main way to actually gain layers of Doomsday. Running 2 carries, you will basically guaranteed to gain 2 layers of Curse of Doomsday quite fast. Bringing him pretty close to max layers already. Then we have the second part: if an enemy dies, self gains energy. Gaining energy is always good, we take that. And a chance to gain extra energy, not bad. Definitely a decent and solid skill. Will make it faster for us to reach our active skill and make it proc our active skill faster. And we will talk about why that might be good at the end of the video. If an ally dies, increases self-speed and holy damage, so even beyond us gaining the Curse of Doomsday and removing debuffs, we will gain speed and holy damage, so if we run carries together with him, that will really do some work. And yeah, those Star Alchemist Home's core teams are actually scaring me at this point. Not gonna lie, I think DH might have to do some balancing there with this hero, especially this will be even more apparent as it already is. For the last skill, Phantom Shadow, this is actually a skill that is pretty similar worded to the one on Azrael, for as Azrael is less passive. When self dies, self transforms into the Phantom Remnant, so remnant version of him that is takes a slot up on the battlefield. So like if you run him in Trial of Champions and he dies, he will not be replaced by another hero because the Phantom Remnant still takes up a slot for X amount of rounds and then revives self. So after X amount of rounds we gain a revive, which is a similar mechanic to like carry, for example. During the existence of Phantom Remnant and at the end of each round, deals damage that ignores armor to all enemies. Armor ignoring damage is always very nice. Armor still is one of the major defenses in the game, and if you can ignore that, that will deal a whole lot more damage. So kind of nice to have that on him. And extra damage to a certain percent of the target's max HP. Again, this will likely have a percent attack maximum. But it's quite nice. I really like that, to be honest. A percent at, of max HP burn, or it's not a burn, percent max HP damage, will be quite nice to have. And if we stack some attack or something on him, can deal a whole lot of damage, and I think that's pretty good. Then on top of that, we also reduce the effect of being healed, and this will be interesting to see what they mean with there, but because we deal the damage to all enemies, if that means we reduce the heal effect on all enemies, and the base version had like 35% reduced heal effect, I think, that will be really huge. That will be really huge because it will actually be a viable counter to Wraec Investor, because if Wraec Investor can't heal anymore, there's really no point in running her on your team, because she won't provide shields, she won't provide anything at all for you, just some damage, and there are better damage dealers. So Wraec Investor might take a hit here in the matter if that really reduces the heal effect on all enemies. So that's quite interesting. Then we have the next sentence. Meanwhile, every one hero killed reduces self-revival countdown by X amount of rounds. And that part is actually quite interesting, because it seems like that is also a buff to the base Azrael revive mechanic. What I criticized at base Azrael was he only reduced the timer on his revive if an enemy died. And killing an enemy is far more difficult than having one of your own heroes die, especially if you run two carries, like we talked about before. And then it's of course pretty easy to have two of your heroes die, and will actually be quite interesting, because he will basically fit in with, it's the same mechanic that carry has. So like carry dying and him dying, that will actually be kind of the same, and each will complement each other's revival, so that's quite great actually, and quite strong. Beyond that, if Phantom Remnant or the active skill Soul Castigation kills any enemy, Lord of Death Azrael will be revived with a certain percent of HP and energy at the beginning of next round and gains Layer of Curse of Doomsday. And this is interesting. This is very interesting actually. Because if we switch into the game now and take a look at the same passive on the base version of Azrael, this last sentence, if Holy Corpse kills an enemy, which is the name of the remnant that base Azrael leaves on the field, it says that only if the Holy Corpse kills any enemy, Azrael will revive. He tested that and it doesn't work in that way. The way this skill works, the normal Azrael also revives when his Soul Castigation kills an enemy. So, feels like they programmed only one hero and forgot to take that part out. Which is kind of funny to me, actually. So, just a little side note here. We'll hop back into the patch notes now. And basically, this is quite good. It's the same now on Azrael. Azrael, I think it's a bug that he does that as well, but if this Soul Castigation kills an enemy, the normal Azrael also revived, and we talked about that, and in the testing we said that this is actually one of his stronger mechanics, because of course you can like slaughter one enemy with this Soul Castigation, deal a huge nuke on that enemy, and he will just pop up again on the next round. And in that way, this is actually quite nice, because if he kills himself, he will not only trigger his Soul Castigation and that will land on the enemy, he will also, of course, trigger his skill effect Curse of Doomsday, and then he will be the Phantom Remnant and will also do damage. And I think what we definitely will have to test is if it's not only his Soul Castigation in that case, or if he would also revive himself if this Curse of Doomsday would kill an enemy. So that is something we will need to test and will be quite interesting. But I think he has like a lot of ways to actually revive himself. which will make him quite valuable in the team. And I think overall, he will be a pretty decent Transcendence hero. Not quite sure if it will be one that you want to have as an A-tier hero, because like a lot of his kit, like the self-damage won't really help you if you have Giant Killer. Giant Killer, he will take a look at his own HP, will notice that it's the same as his own HP, and Giant Killer won't have any effect on that part of his skill. Defier Might, if his health is high enough. Not sure if you would want to have Holy Armor or Divine Block. So I'm not really sure if that would be the optimal hero to have as an A tier. I think a B tier might just be enough. If you, of course, you want like the highest holy damage awakening stat that you can on him, or like the highest awakening stats with like 7,500 or something attack stats, then of course, yes, for sure get him as an A tier or A plus or whatever. But I'm not sure a lot of his skills are basically buffed by that. We have to see if Curse of Doomsday and Giant Killer work together, but for the moment I don't have an A tier Azrael. There was just one on the market, and I think Jesus bought it? I'm not sure. Was pretty expensive. I don't really want to buy early A tiers of those heroes. For me, it feels like a gamble, that you gamble on the hero being good and not be like a support type, because you wouldn't really need an A tier of a support type. And if you wanted to buy an A tier of a support type, you would definitely have a look at the speed. And most of those early versions of heroes that are released and are in the auction house before they actually become a Transcendence hero are mostly mediocre. So didn't buy one yet. I might, I'm not sure. I will do the testing definitely without an A tier on the hero, with like a B tier copy. I have my B- score saved up for this Awakening event that is most likely going to come up. It's not announced yet, and we'll try to get a B- or B copy that will be decent for testing as well. So all in all, I think this is a pretty solid hero. He will complement certain types of teams like the Star Alchemist Storm Score team. Very good. He has a great synergy with Carry and other Revive heroes. Most likely will be Carry. And I think that he can be quite strong. So I'm eager to test him, guys. I really want to hear your opinions on the guy. Will we see a revival of Carry in the meta? Will there be a lot more Carries soon? I sure think so. I sure think there will be some teams that will use Carry, if this guy is really as strong as I think he will be. One more thing to note though, because that's going to be the question: do I think he will be a good first Transcendence hero? I'm not sure about that. I think no, because a lot of his kit actually revolves about him dying, and if you die, for example, like in Aspen Dungeon, if he dies in Aspen Dungeon, he's dead. Done. Fight end. Because he's the only hero on the battlefield, him dying will actually mean you just lost the battle. So, not really a good one for that. Dealing damage to all enemies, of course, has the potential to be a great nuke for like most, like Wraec or something. But we will have to see if he can outscale, like for example, EOS or SFX in doing that. And I wouldn't really aim to make him your first Transcendence hero, or at least I would recommend waiting until we've tested him thoroughly and can tell you more about his skills and whether or not he's going to be good. So with that, guys, I want to end the video. Definitely write me your opinion in the comments, and we will see us in the next one.